Dawn breaks over a rocky outcrop in the Serengeti, and a lioness lies pressed against granite still warm from yesterday's sun. Beside her, a male with a mane the color of dried grass shifts his weight, then mounts her. 11 seconds. He releases a low, rasping growl and steps back. She swats at him, teeth bared, and rolls onto her side. 20 minutes pass. Somewhere below the outcrop, a francolin calls twice and goes quiet. Then it happens again, and again. For the next 4 days, this pair will repeat this exact sequence somewhere between 80 and 100 times, day and night, without pause for a real meal, without leaving this half-acre of rock. The rest of the pride is nowhere in sight, scattered somewhere across the grass below, and neither lion seems to notice or care. This pair has effectively stepped outside the normal rhythm of the pride entirely, and they will stay stepped outside it for longer than seems possible for two animals that need food, water, and rest to survive. By any measure of efficiency, this makes no sense. A single successful mating is enough to fertilize an egg. Most mammals know this instinctively and behave accordingly. So why would two of the most powerful predators on the African continent spend nearly 100 hours locked into a cycle that burns calories neither of them can spare, in a place where every hour of distraction could cost them a kill, a cub, or their lives? Today, we're going to find out why lions mate every 15 to 20 minutes for days on end, and what that number is actually protecting. To understand why this happens, you first have to understand what a pride actually is when nobody is mating. A pride is not a family in the way people imagine it. It's a coalition of related lionesses, usually sisters, mothers, and daughters, who hold a territory together and raise cubs communally, nursing each other's young without distinction. Guarding that territory falls to a separate group entirely, a coalition of males, sometimes brothers, sometimes unrelated allies who fought their way in together, because a single lion almost never holds a pride alone for long. A typical coalition defends a territory of somewhere between 80 and 250 square kilometers, depending on prey density, and every kilometer of it is contested. Outside the boundary, other coalitions are already watching, waiting for weakness. Inside the boundary, life during a normal week is almost lazy. Lions sleep for 18 to 20 hours a day. Hunting is a shared, infrequent event, usually at night, usually led by the lionesses while the males patrol the perimeter, roaring to mark ownership of ground that took blood to win. A pride like this one holds roughly a dozen lionesses and their offspring, with 2 or 3 males sharing guard duty in rotation, and it can take years to build. Cubs born into it face long odds even under normal conditions. Across most studied populations in the Serengeti ecosystem, fewer than 1 in 5 cubs survives to reach independence at around 2 years old, picked off by leopards, buffalo, drought, or simply starvation during a lean season. Every one of those cubs represents months of investment by the entire pride, not just the mother, and every threat to that investment is treated accordingly. Then, a lioness comes into estrus, and every rule of that lazy week is suspended. The first complication arrives almost immediately, and it isn't a rival. It's her own biology. Unlike humans, lionesses don't ovulate on a fixed schedule and simply wait to be fertilized. They are what biologists call induced ovulators, which means the act of mating itself is what triggers the release of an egg. One encounter does nothing. The reproductive system needs repeated, specific stimulation over an extended window, sometimes tracked by researchers at intervals as short as 8 to 24 minutes apart, before an egg is even released into the fallopian tube. So the male isn't repeating an unnecessary act. He's running an engine that only starts after enough friction has built up, and neither of them can know in advance exactly how much is enough. Get it wrong, stop too early, and 4 days of effort produce nothing at all. That uncertainty opens the second complication, and this one is dangerous. A receptive lioness doesn't just interest the male standing next to her. Her scent carries on the wind, sometimes for several kilometers, farther than either lion can control. Within a day, other males within range, sometimes from a neighboring coalition testing the border, start to circle. On the second morning of this particular pair's ordeal, a lone male appears at the tree line less than 400 meters from the outcrop, pausing to scent mark a termite mound before edging closer. He is young, his mane still dark and short, the kind of male field biologists call a nomad, without a territory of his own, searching for exactly this kind of opening. The resident male rises immediately, roars once, a sound that carries across the plain and can be heard by lions 8 kilometers away, and charges to the tree line. The confrontation lasts less than a minute. No claws meet flesh this time. The nomad breaks off and retreats, but he doesn't leave the area entirely. He simply waits, farther back now, in a stand of whistling thorn, watching. That's the cost of a single interruption. The resident male has now left her side for the first time in nearly 2 days, and he returns to find her scent has shifted almost imperceptibly, which means the clock inside her body may have reset by hours he can't measure. He can't know how much progress toward ovulation was lost by 2 minutes of absence. So he goes back to what he was doing before the nomad arrived, because leaving again isn't a risk he can afford to take twice in 1 day. But staying that close for that long creates its own cost, and this is where the story turns from strange to brutal. Repeated mating at this frequency is not gentle. The male's barbed penis, a feature almost unique to cats, is thought to help trigger her ovulation on withdrawal, and it's also why she often turns and snarls or swipes at him immediately afterward, sometimes drawing blood across his muzzle. Days of this leave both animals with raw, exhausted bodies, and neither one is eating anything close to a normal amount. A male lion on an average day needs upward of 15 pounds of meat. During a mating bout that can stretch past 96 hours, he may eat almost nothing, running on stored fat and adrenaline, standing guard over a partner who is equally starved and equally unwilling to break formation to hunt. By the 3rd day, both animals move more slowly between encounters, and the 20-minute intervals sometimes stretch to 25 or 30, not because the biology has changed, but because exhaustion has started to compete with instinct. The temperature on the exposed granite climbs past 40 degrees Celsius by mid-afternoon, and neither lion seeks the shade more than a few meters away, because a few meters is still too far. That's when the 4th complication finds them, and it has nothing to do with rival males at all. A pride distracted by mating is a pride that has effectively stopped functioning as a hunting and defensive unit. Roughly 2 kilometers from the outcrop, 3 lionesses are still tending the pride's existing litter, 4 cubs barely 10 weeks old, hidden in a stand of acacia scrub. Hyenas, who track lion prides constantly and probe for exactly this kind of lapse, have already noticed that the pride's dominant male has vanished from his usual patrol route for 2 straight days. A clan of 6 begins moving closer to the acacia stand at dusk, testing the boundary the way they always do, in short advancing rushes, followed by retreat. The lionesses guarding the cubs hold the line, but barely, and one cub, separated briefly during the confusion, isn't recovered until after dark. Researchers who have tracked prides through an entire estrus cycle have documented exactly this pattern repeatedly. spikes in scavenger activity, and even successful opportunistic cub predation concentrated almost entirely during the windows when the pride's most capable defenders are locked into a mating bond a mile away and unable to respond. The fifth complication arrives on the third night, and this one comes from inside the pride itself. Food has run out. The lionesses who would normally organize a hunt are the same ones distracted by their own reproductive cycles or occupied watching cubs. And with the dominant male absent from every patrol, a young subadult male from a neighboring, weaker coalition tests the northern boundary for the first time in months, walking almost 2 kilometers inside territory he would never have dared enter a week earlier. He finds no resistance because there is none to find. He retreats before dawn, unchallenged, but he remembers the route. Boundaries in lion territory are not walls. They are habits, maintained by presence and roaring and scent marking performed on a near-daily basis. And 4 days without any of that leaves gaps that outside coalitions notice immediately and remember for weeks afterward. Male lions typically hold a territory for only 2 to 3 years before being displaced by a stronger coalition, and biologists who study these turnovers describe the process less as a single dramatic battle and more as an accumulation of exactly these small, unnoticed absences. Each one a data point a rival coalition quietly banks for later. And even after all of that risk is absorbed, the odds are still working against the pair on the outcrop. A single estrus cycle, with all of those dozens upon dozens of matings, results in successful conception only around a quarter of the time. If it fails, there's no shortcut. She'll cycle again in roughly 3 weeks, and the entire ordeal, the guarding, the starvation, the exposed cubs, the constant threat from outside males, resets from zero, with no guarantee the same male will even still hold this territory when it does. So why would evolution favor a mechanism this costly instead of a simpler, safer one? The answer only comes into focus once you understand what happens on the other side of a pride takeover. And that's where the story reaches back decades, to one of the most quietly devastating discoveries in African field biology. In the 1960s, the biologist George Schaller arrived in the Serengeti to begin what would become one of the longest continuous studies of a single predator species ever conducted, and spent years embedded with lion prides, recording behavior that had never been systematically counted before. His field notes, later published in his landmark study of the Serengeti lion, were the first to put a hard figure on what everyone in the field had only suspected: an estimated 3,000 matings for every single cub that survived to adulthood. Decades later, Craig Packer took over long-term monitoring of many of the same prides and spent much of his career studying pride takeovers specifically across the Serengeti and the Ngorongoro crater, tracking dozens of coalition turnovers in exhaustive detail across more than 3 decades of continuous fieldwork. His data showed that when an outside male coalition successfully overthrows the resident males and takes control of a pride, the very first thing the new males typically do, within days and sometimes hours, is kill every cub under roughly 9 months old that isn't their own. Packer's teams documented cases where entire litters vanished within 48 hours of a takeover, and calculated that infanticide by incoming males was responsible for as much as a quarter of all cub mortality across the population he studied. In some recorded takeovers, a lioness who tried to defend her cubs against the incoming males was injured badly enough to affect her own ability to conceive again for months afterward, which meant the cost of resistance could be almost as steep as the loss itself. It's a strategy, cold as it sounds, that brings the mothers back into estrus almost immediately, sometimes within a week, so the new males can start producing their own offspring without waiting a year or more for another male's cubs to mature and leave. This single fact recontextualizes everything happening on that outcrop. A lioness who mates only once, with an obvious, clean act, would leave her paternity easy to determine, and easy for an incoming male to reject as unworthy of protecting. But a lioness who mates dozens of times, sometimes with more than one male in a multi-male coalition, muddies the question of paternity so thoroughly that every male who took part has a genetic stake in the outcome. None of them can be certain the cubs aren't theirs. And that uncertainty, as brutal as the logic sounds, is itself the cub's best chance at survival months before it's even conceived. A confused father is a father who hesitates to kill. There's a common belief, one that even shows up in older nature documentaries, that this behavior is simply about maximizing the chance of pregnancy. More attempts equals better odds. The same logic you'd apply to any gamble. But that's not what's actually happening. The repetition isn't hedging a bet on fertilization, and it isn't wasted effort either. It's manufacturing biological uncertainty on purpose, a defense system built out of ambiguity instead of teeth or claws, aimed squarely at a threat that hasn't even arrived yet, sometimes years before it does. There's a second misconception worth clearing up here too, the idea that the male is the one driving this entire process, forcing repetition on a reluctant partner. Field observations consistently show the opposite. It's the lioness who initiates the vast majority of these encounters, rubbing against the male, presenting herself, sometimes walking away and circling back if he's slow to respond. She is, in every meaningful sense, running the schedule. By the fourth day, the lioness in the outcrop we started with finally stops soliciting. Her scent has changed. The male who stayed by her side, thinner now, his ribs faintly visible beneath a dust-covered coat, a fresh scrape still healing across his muzzle from her last swipe, finally leaves to drink at a nearby pool for the first time in 3 days, drinking for almost a full minute without lifting his head. The nomad male at the tree line is gone, having moved on to test some other pride's boundary somewhere out past the ridge. The young subadult who walked 2 kilometers into contested ground on the third night has already told no one, because lions don't share information that way, but he will try the same route again within the month. Whether an egg was released and fertilized during those roughly 100 attempts won't be confirmed for weeks, when either her belly begins to swell or her scent turns receptive again, and the entire sequence restarts from nothing. If she is pregnant, the cubs she eventually hides in a thicket away from the pride will carry a kind of insurance their mother purchased at the cost of her own hunger, her own exhaustion. One nearly successful incursion by a nomad male, a boundary quietly tested and found empty, and one lost cub in a scrub thicket 2 kilometers away. The other lionesses of the pride, who spent those 4 days holding the perimeter with 1 fewer defender than usual, will fold her back into the group without ceremony, the way prides absorb almost everything. And within a week, the entire episode will be indistinguishable from any other stretch of the dry season. No visible trace of what it cost to get here. None of the outside world stopped for those 4 days. The hyena clan that tested the acacia stand will try again the next time an opportunity like this presents itself, and it will. The nomad male will eventually find a pride with a weaker defense, or he won't, and either outcome writes itself into the same statistics Schaller began collecting more than half a century ago. It's easy to look at a number like 15 to 20 minutes repeated for 4 days straight and read it as excess, as an animal behaving wastefully. But nothing in a system this exposed to predation, rival takeover, and infanticide can afford true waste. What looks like repetition is closer to a signature, written over and over until it becomes illegible to anyone who might later want to erase it. Somewhere in the Serengeti right now, as the dry season pushes prides closer together around the last remaining water, that same exhausting 4-day negotiation between risk and survival is happening again. On some other outcrop, between some other pair, for exactly the same reason it happened this morning.